I woke to the sound of laughter. Not loud, not joyful, something softer. Familiar voices, layered like steam from morning coffee. My wife's voice and someone else's. Probably Emily, I thought. She came by sometimes. They'd talk about work, their shop, swap stories about clients or suppliers, or brainstorm ways to stretch another week's worth of inventory. I looked over at the other side of the bed. Cold. Empty. She'd been up for a while. The clock read 8:42. Not early, but early enough. I sat up slowly and rubbed the back of my neck. The light coming through the blinds had that overcast look. Maybe rain was coming. I reached for my sweatshirt, padded into the hallway. Half asleep, planning breakfast, thinking I'd offer to cook for once. But then I heard her voice, and something about the tone stopped me mid-step. She wasn't chatting. She wasn't laughing the way you do when a friend comes over. She was opening up, and not to me. She said she'd come into work after another fight, one that left her shaking, on edge. She hadn't told me we fought. Not recently, anyway. We'd had a few tense days, sure. Things felt tight. Financially, emotionally. But a fight? That word caught me off guard. She told her friend Madison had noticed right away. That she looked wrecked. Madison had made her sit down, breathe. Just that image, my wife, unraveling in the back office of the shop, being comforted by someone else, felt like a punch I didn't see coming. She told Madison that it was always the same, arguments about money, about exhaustion, about feeling like she was failing at everything. Failing. That word hit hard. She never said that to me, never even hinted at it. Not directly. Then, according to her, Madison had told her maybe it was time to stop surviving and start living differently. Living differently. I slid down in the hallway chair, the one we always said we'd replace, but never did. My back pressed against the wall. My ears tuned to her voice. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I couldn't move. She told Madison she laughed off the comment at first, said something about barely staying afloat with all our bills. And then Madison asked her, who said the answer had to be here? That line sat heavy in my chest. The answer? Where else would it be? She said she didn't understand it right away. Asked Madison if she meant. And these were her words, selling herself. My stomach turned. But Madison had answered calmly, apparently. Told her it wasn't for just anyone. Only for those who could carry it. That the people who paid for it paid for company, warmth, presence, paid very well. I leaned my head back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. Presence. Warmth. She wasn't joking. There was no sarcasm in her voice. No humor. Only exhaustion. She'd asked Madison how she could explain the money at home. How she could make it all seem normal. And Madison, ever the problem solver, had reassured her. They could make it work. Business trips. Investments. Something I could believe. And I would have. Of course I would have. She was smart. Creative. She'd built that shop with grit and scraps. I believed in her because she gave me no reason not to. Then she said something else. That at the time, she thought it wasn't for her. That she couldn't go that far. For a brief second, I felt relief. She had boundaries. She'd said no. But the way she said it, past tense, distant, it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like a memory. Then she said she hadn't known what would come next. And I realized this wasn't the story of a line she refused to cross. It was the story of how she got closer to it. I looked at the rug beneath my feet. Navy blue. Cheap. Slightly frayed. We'd picked it out together 3 years ago on a warehouse sale trip. I remember her laughing as we tried to fit into the back of the car. We were broke then, but somehow happy. Now, I wasn't sure if we'd ever really been happy. We're just good at pretending. I tried to run through the last few months. The business trips. The uptick in her lifestyle. The new bag she said she'd found on clearance. The spa day that was gifted by a client. The hotel rewards card that suddenly had points. I wanted to believe it was all explainable. Coincidental. Innocent. But now that I'd heard the context, now that I knew Madison had offered her a door to something else, none of it felt innocent anymore. She didn't speak like someone bragging, or even confessing. She spoke like someone who'd crossed into another version of herself. Not with pride, but with a kind of quiet resignation. And me? I believed every story, every excuse, every smile. Because trust, when it's been earned slowly and honestly, is a hard thing to question. But now, sitting just outside that living room, I felt like the world I'd built around us was being carefully, methodically dismantled, and I hadn't even noticed the first brick being pulled. She was tired, and I missed it. She felt lost, and I kept saying we'll be fine. She needed something to change, and I thought love would be enough. I stayed there, in the hallway, long after their conversation moved on, long after the kettle was turned off and the clink of mugs faded. I didn't go in, because I didn't want to see her face. Not yet. Because if I looked at her, I wasn't sure what I'd find, the woman I married or the stranger I'd just overheard. And I needed a little more time to decide which one hurt more. What she said hadn't shattered me, but it cracked something deep inside. And I had this sinking feeling the next part of her story was going to split it wide open. I didn't move from the hallway. Not right away. There's a strange sort of paralysis that sets in when you realize your life isn't what you thought it was, not in some grand, cinematic twist, but slowly. Like water seeping under a door. By the time you feel the dampness, it's already too late. The conversation in the living room went on. Quieter now, as if the hardest part had already been said. But it hadn't. Not by a long shot. She said there was another fight sometime after that first conversation with Madison. I knew exactly the one she meant. We were in the kitchen. A Tuesday evening, if memory serves. I'd come home late from a freelance job, roofing, I think. She was already cooking, and I was too tired to pretend I wasn't frustrated. I told her something cruel, something sharp and stupid, said from a place of fatigue, not truth. That she was a burden. That if it weren't for the fact that we were in this together, I might have left long ago. I remember how quiet she got. No yelling, no tears, just silence. She stood at the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I thought she was just tuning me out, letting it pass. I didn't realize what that silence had cost her. She told her friend that she didn't argue, didn't even look back at me, just watched the rain. She thought it was the end. Of what? She didn't say. Our marriage. Her hope? Herself? Maybe all three. Then she said that the very next day, she went to Madison and told her she was ready. Ready to be introduced to one of them. I pressed my palm to the wall, my legs suddenly heavy. So it wasn't something that just happened. It wasn't a slippery slope or a moment of weakness. It was a decision, a conscious one, and she made it. She chose it. She told Madison she didn't have any more strength left, that she couldn't keep living the way we were. That word again, strength. I thought we were strong. I thought she was strong. But maybe it wasn't about strength the way I understood it. Maybe it was about something else entirely, about running out of belief. She said Madison didn't act surprised, just asked if she was sure. And when she nodded, Madison left the room to make a call. Before stepping out, she apparently looked back and told her, "There's no going back from this. Think carefully." 10 minutes later, she came back with a name, a plan, a trip booked for the next day. Pack, rest, don't screw it up. That's what Madison told her. I felt something give way inside me, like an old beam finally cracking after holding too much weight for too long. The memory came rushing in, clear as day. Her suitcase by the door. That little carry-on with the worn wheels. She was smiling, excited even. Told me she was heading to Chicago for a vendor meetup, something to do with marketing strategies and boutique retail connections. She promised to bring back ideas, brochures, maybe even a new wholesaler. I believed her, of course. I'd helped zip the bag, carried it to the car, kissed her cheek before she got in, whispered, "Hang in there. I love you." And she'd smiled, leaned in, and said, "I love you too." That moment, I'd replayed it before, in better times. Now it just echoed back at me like a lie dressed in affection. I lowered myself to the floor, my back against the wall. My chest was tight, like I'd climbed 1,000 stairs and couldn't catch my breath. I want to scream, or break something, but I didn't. That's not how I'm wired. Pain like this, it's quieter. It hums through your bones. She made a choice, and somehow that was harder to accept than if she'd been forced into it, because I could have forgiven a moment of desperation. But this wasn't desperation. It was calculation, coordination. Madison, the call, the plan, the packing, and me, clueless. Sitting here now, I couldn't stop picturing the rain on that window pane. Her standing there, still as stone, while I paced the kitchen behind her, flinging my own disappointment around like it was hers to carry. And maybe in some way it was, but not like this. She could have told me, could have said she was drowning, that something had to give. I don't know what I would have done, to be honest, but I would have listened. Instead, she went to Madison, and then she packed. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. The living room had gone quiet. Only the occasional clink of a spoon against a mug. No more confessions. Not for now. But the silence didn't feel like relief. It felt like aftermath. Like a storm had passed and left everything drenched. She'd chosen to go. Not because she hated me. Not even, I think, because she stopped loving me. But because she believed love wasn't enough anymore. Not when the fridge was half empty. Not when the rent was late. Not when I looked at her like she was the problem instead of the situation. Still, nothing excuses betrayal. Nothing makes it okay to lie with that much calm. She let me kiss her goodbye. Let me believe in a story she was already rewriting. And the cruelest part? She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, listening to the creaks of the house, the occasional low hum of the refrigerator, the fading echo of her voice. She thought she had no strength left. But I wondered, had she looked at me at all? Had she asked if I had anything left? Because now, I wasn't sure. And I had this sinking feeling that what came next, the parts she hadn't said yet, were going to test me even more. And I wasn't sure what I'd do when that test came. But I knew one thing. The man I was when I woke up that morning, he was already gone. At some point, I pulled my knees to my chest on that hallway floor, my back against the wall, my arms loose at my sides. The hum of the fridge came and went. The light shifted in the house, brightened slightly, then faded again. Time moved. I didn't. I could still hear their voices, hers softer now, slower, as if each word weighed more than the last. Her friend didn't say much. Maybe she was listening, or maybe she didn't know what to say anymore. My wife said they flew to Miami. Her tone was calm, matter of fact, like she was recounting a business trip, which I guess in some awful way it was. She said I drove her to the airport, smiling, joking. That was true. I stood in line for coffee while she checked her gate. Tried to make her laugh by pretending I'd mess up the order. I always did. She kissed me on the cheek before boarding and said she'd miss me. I remember the exact way she said it. And now I hated that I remembered. She said a car picked them up from the airport. Her in Madison. Private driver. Then a hotel with an ocean view. Not a corporate chain, but something boutique. Quiet. Clean. Expensive. She said it all felt too perfect. Too polished. She and Madison shared a room, at least at first. They had dinner downstairs. Some seafood place with white linen tablecloths and candles on every table. Afterward, Madison left. Went to her own room. And that's when he arrived. Mr. Sullivan. Ethan Sullivan. The name echoed like a bruise. Older. Refined. The kind of man who could walk into any room and own it without saying a word. Polished shoes, gold cufflinks, the whole deal. A face I'd never seen, and now was burned into my marriage. She said he went to shower while she sat under the covers. Heart pounding. She didn't run. Didn't leave. She stayed. She said her thoughts were loud, that her mind screamed while her body stayed still. And then she let go. Of the last layer. Of the final line she hadn't yet crossed. I lowered my forehead to my knees. My fingers dug into the rug. It wasn't the act itself. It was the quiet in her voice. That unnerving calm, like she'd already made peace with it. She said he came out in a robe. Took it off. Lay next to her. Asked if she was awake. She said yes. And in the quiet of that expensive room, under the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the curtains, A silent understanding passed between them. The air thickened with unspoken desires and a sense of irreversible choice. She felt a shift within herself, a yielding to the moment, a departure from the life she knew. There was a closeness that transcended words, a shared vulnerability in the stillness of the night. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, she knew she was no longer the same. Something profound had occurred, a silent transaction that left her feeling both hollowed out and irrevocably changed. I couldn't breathe. My mind flooded with all the small details that used to comfort me. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, how she always left the tea bag in too long, how she called our son Buddy when he was sick. Had all of that been real, or just well-placed pieces of a role she was still trying to hold on to? I wanted to unhear it, to reach into my own ears and rip out every word she'd just spoken. But silence would have been worse, because then I'd still be kissing her goodbye at airports, still helping her pack, still telling her to have fun and come back with good news. Still believing. She said the next morning, her period started. She panicked, thought that meant the arrangement was over. But Sullivan just smiled, told her they'd figure something else out. And they did. Walks, dinners, and more hotel rooms. She said the bed became part of the arrangement, a recurring detail, a routine. Not once, not twice, but again and again. I stood slowly, my legs stiff, my heart a dull, slow drum. I took a few steps toward the living room. The door was just ahead, a few feet. That was all. But I didn't go in. I couldn't. Instead, I stood with my hand resting on the frame, as if the house itself could keep me upright. Behind that wall was a version of my wife I'd never known existed. A version who walked through airports with her shoulders squared and secrets tucked in her suitcase. A version who looked me in the eye and said, "I love you," while her mind was already somewhere else. With someone else. The reality I had lived in, the stability, the routine, the love was cracking. Not like glass shattering suddenly. No, this was colder. It cracked like ice. From the inside, quietly, cruelly, without warning. I didn't know who she was anymore, and I didn't know what we were. But one thing had become painfully clear. The life we had, the one I thought we were building, brick by careful brick, had already been sold to someone else. And all I had left was the version of her she allowed me to see. I turned away from the door, and for the first time since I'd woken up that morning, I let myself feel it. Not anger. Not yet. Just grief. For a marriage that still existed in memory, but not in truth. I stayed standing. The hallway had become something like purgatory, a space between the man I had been and whoever I was becoming, minute by minute, word by word. Their conversation had shifted into the bedroom now. Voices lower, more intimate, not in the romantic sense, that was long gone, but in the way people talk when they know they're saying something that changes everything. I moved toward the door, not deliberately. My feet just took me there, like muscle memory pulling me toward what I once thought was safety. One hand on the doorframe, the same hand that had once held hers at the altar. She was talking again, her voice sharp now, measured, like a scalpel. She said that when she got back from that first trip, Miami, she told me she'd taken out a business loan, that she'd invested in inventory, marketing, new signage, and I had believed her. Of course I did. She even had paperwork. Madison had helped. The records were real. Bank statements, withdrawal slips. Everything checked out. I remember that moment, too. She was glowing. Not in the way pregnant women do. That came later. But glowing from momentum. From confidence. And I felt proud. She'd done it, I thought. She turned a corner. She was finally winning. And I kissed her. Told her I was proud. God help me, I meant it. She said the first payment nearly made her faint. That it was more money than she'd ever seen hit her account. And I hadn't asked questions. Why would I? The shop had been struggling for years. She'd been working overtime, taking risks. I believed because I trusted. I trusted because I loved. And I loved without reserve. Now, that trust felt like a loaded gun I'd handed her myself. She kept talking. She said we bought a house, upgraded the car, paid off old credit card debt. Life got easier. On the surface, at least. We smiled more, went out more, took the boys to the lake that summer. I remember thinking, we're finally catching up to the life we always wanted. But now I know we weren't catching up. We were being carried by a lie. Then she said the words I wasn't ready for. She found out she was pregnant, and I remember that day vividly. She came out of the bathroom holding the test, eyes wide and teary. I picked her up, spun her around. I told her it was a new beginning, that everything was finally falling into place. But she hesitated, even now, in the retelling. She said she wasn't sure, that the timing didn't sit right. She and Madison had just returned from another trip 2 weeks before she missed her period. And the panic she'd felt that morning in Miami, when Sullivan smiled and told her they'd figure it out, came rushing back. She never took a test, never really checked, because she didn't want to know, because knowing would mean choosing. And now she wasn't sure. She didn't know if the child was mine or Sullivan's. She said it like a fact, not with shame, not with drama, just the truth. And that truth ripped through me like a rusted nail. My boy, the one I'd stayed up with through colic, taught to ride a bike, held when he had nightmares. Is he mine? Or just the child I thought was mine? The one I gave my heart to without hesitation? I pressed my forehead against the doorframe. My throat tightened. A sound clawed at the back of my chest. Not anger. Agony. She kept talking. She said the trips continued. That she kept going. Kept getting paid. That it got harder. And she thinks I started to suspect. That I sensed something. But I never said anything. Because it was easier to believe. She was right. I had felt it. In the way she'd stopped talking mid-sentence when I walked in the room. In the shift of her energy after every conference. In the way she started holding her son a little tighter, like overcompensating for something she couldn't bear to say. I'd felt it. But I chose to believe the version of her I loved. The version I wanted to protect. Not the one who was slipping away. Because if I questioned it, I would have had to face this. This reality. This gut-wrenching, soul-tearing truth. That everything I built, the long hours, the budgeting, the sacrifices, was propped up on something I never even saw coming. Not because I was blind, but because I was loyal. Because I wanted to believe we were still on the same team. I took a step forward, wanted to open the door, to look her in the eye and ask, why? How could you? But I didn't. Because suddenly, the shame wasn't hers alone. It clung to me too, for trusting, for not seeing, for still loving her even now, and worst of all, for being afraid of what her face would look like when she realized I'd heard everything. That shame burned hotter than rage, because I hadn't just lost trust. I'd lost the right to trust, and the cost of that, I wasn't sure I could even name yet, but it was everything. I don't know how long I stood there, just outside the bedroom, forehead pressed to the wooden frame like it might hold me up. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the only thing in the house that hadn't lied to me. Inside, her voice carried with startling clarity, not soft now, not guilty, not even hesitant. She told her friend that she wasn't the same woman anymore, that the version of her who believed love would be enough was gone, dead and buried under the weight of bills, disappointments, and silent mornings spent standing in windows while the rain came down. She said she was colder now, but stronger, and if pulling herself out of that hole cost her body, then so be it. I stood there and listened. Her words didn't just sting, they sliced. But the oddest thing happened. Something in me shifted. The confusion, the disbelief, the swirling sense of betrayal. They started to fade. Not because the pain was gone, but because in that moment I saw it for what it was. Clean, sharp, real. This was who she'd become. And maybe this was who I'd become too. I took a deep breath, let it fill my chest. And then, finally, I stepped into the living room. She jumped, her eyes wide like a child caught with stolen candy. Her friend, Jessica, I think, froze mid-sip, her mug hovering halfway to her lips. How long have you been standing there? My wife asked. Her voice had changed. Low now, unsure. I looked at her. Really looked. Long enough, I said. Long enough to hear the story you never meant to tell me. Jessica looked between us, then back at her, silently waiting for direction. Jessica, I said, polite but firm. Would you give us a minute? She grabbed her purse, muttered something under her breath, and slipped out. Door clicked shut behind her. We stood there, just the two of us, the silence, so heavy it felt like furniture. You shouldn't have listened, she said finally, arms crossed, shoulders tense. That wasn't your conversation. It should have been, I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. For years, it should have been mine. She let out a sharp breath, a laugh, maybe, or something that wanted to be. And what difference would it have made, she said. You wouldn't have changed. We'd still be living off scraps. Still in your dad's basement. Still watching life pass us by. Now you drive a decent car. We own a house. You eat from a full fridge. You got used to this life. You benefited from it just like I did. I looked at her, that version of her I didn't know anymore. My voice dropped. Are you serious? Yes, she snapped. Because you didn't carry the weight. You didn't fight your way out when we were drowning. I did. I saved our lives. And mine. I stepped closer. Not in anger. Just to see her clearly. No, I whispered. You sold it. You sold our life. Me. Yourself. And my voice broke. Our son. She flinched just barely. I looked into his eyes every day thinking, I'm his father. And now, my voice shook. What am I? Just a man who raised someone else's child, not knowing. She didn't answer. She just breathed. Heavy, defensive, maybe scared. I didn't care anymore. You had no right, I said louder now. I trusted you. I loved you. And you destroyed all of it. And the worst part? You're standing here, defending it, like I'm the one who failed. Because you did fail, she hissed. You never once said thank you. You just accepted everything like it was owed to you. I looked at her for a long time. Really looked. I didn't see the woman I married. I saw someone else. I'm filing for divorce. Her face fell. For the first time that morning, she didn't have a ready answer. You're kidding. I'm packing now, I said. I'll stay with Marcus until I find something permanent. Don't worry, the house is yours. The kid. I paused. Even if he's not mine, he's innocent in this mess. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't plead. She just stood there, arms at her sides. And for the first time that morning, she was silent. 3 months later, Marcus's apartment wasn't much. 2 rooms, 1 shared bathroom, windows that faced the train tracks. The walls were thin and the water pressure temperamental. But it was quiet, and it was mine. Well, borrowed. But still, it felt like a kind of refuge. The first days were sharp, quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. My body ached, not from labor, from loss. My chest felt hollow. My sleep came in short, fitful pieces. Some nights I'd wake up thinking I heard my son calling from down the hall. But the hall wasn't mine anymore. Sometimes I'd look in the mirror and wonder, am I still me? Or just the outline of a man who used to believe? She said I got used to the life she built. But she was wrong. I never got used to it. I loved. I sacrificed. I gave her everything I had. And when that wasn't enough for her, she rewrote the rules and called it strength. Maybe it was. But strength without truth isn't courage. It's survival dressed up as pride. I blamed her. Then I blamed myself. Then both of us. Eventually, I stopped blaming anyone. What good would it do? The pain didn't disappear. It just changed shape. From fire to shadow. Still there, just quieter. I started writing. Not for anyone. Just for myself. To empty the noise out of my head. I walked more. Even in the rain. Even when the city was gray and my thoughts heavier than the sky. I walked anyway. One morning in a coffee shop, a girl spilled tea on my jeans. I looked down at the stain, then up at her panicked face, and said, finally, something hot in my life. She laughed. I laughed too. And for the first time in months, it felt real. I didn't forget. I never will. But I stopped living in the past. Stopped bowing to it. Stopped letting it define me. I lost a family. But I didn't lose myself. That was the truth. Maybe the only one that mattered. Love isn't blind sacrifice. It's not control. It's not a lie you agree to believe. It's a choice. And when one person betrays that choice, the other has every right to walk away. And I did. Not broken, not bitter, just honest, and stronger than I've ever been.